Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do, all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lady Liberty, and this is episode number 109. In this show, we're going to explore the meaning of playfulness, play, and fun. This show is a pre-record of a conversation I had between Bernard de Koven, a visionary author, mystic, and champion of fun, and Dr. Peter Gray, a research professor of psychology at Boston College, who has conducted and published research in neuroendocrinology, developmental psychology, anthropology, and education. As different as those two men may sound on paper, their work intersects in the most playful ways. In his book, A Playful Path, Bernie de Koven writes, "When we are playing together despite our differences, we celebrate a transcendent sameness, a unity that underlines the illusion of our separateness. You could call this an act of love, an enacted love that lets us keep the game going. Many acts of love, in fact, many acts of compassion, caring, trust, and assurance," unquote. We recorded this conversation in late May of 2017, not knowing where the conversation would take us, but we knew one thing: it would be fun. Play, playing, playfulness, and fun play an important role in human development. But why is it important? And can we really have a serious conversation about the importance of play? Is it true that play facilitates humans to tap into their creativity while developing their imagination, dexterity, and physical, cognitive, and emotional strength? Is it true that play is important to healthy brain development? Is it also true that through play, children learn how to engage and interact in the world around them? I invite you to stay tuned for this conversation coming right up. But first, I want to remind you that you can find out more about our panelists tonight at our website at fortheloveoflearningshow.com and look for episode number 109. There you will find links to our panelists' websites, projects, and their bios. Now we are ready to jump right in. Going. So, Peter, go ahead and introduce yourself. The floor is yours.
I'm Peter Gray. I'm a research psychologist at Boston College. I taught for about 30 years and retired quite a while ago from teaching, but I continue to do research. Many years ago, I got interested in how children learn when they're in charge of their own education, when they really can direct their own learning. And that really led me to the topic of play, because what children do is play. And, there hasn't been, surprisingly, given that play is probably the most important thing that human beings do, there's been very little actual research on play, precious little. In fact, there's more research on animal play than there is on human play. And so one of the things I did early on was to kind of review the literature on animal play. And animals play at the very things that they need to learn, and that's how they learn them. And that idea led me to really look at human play in every context I could, from hunter-gatherer cultures, not that I've studied them directly myself, but by interviewing anthropologists, where children are learning everything, basically everything they need to know through play and their own self-directed exploration, to very alternative schools in our culture where children are in charge of their own learning and observing the amazing things that children are capable of learning through their own self-directed play and exploration. So that's academically what got me interested in play. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when Bernie de Koven's book, The Playful Path, came out, I read that book, and it really, in some ways, was a turning point for me. It's not so much that it shifted entirely what I was doing as that it played a role in seeing what I was doing. I think that as I've gotten older, one of the things that's happened is I've recognized that really all of life is play. Everything I do is play. I take what I do a little less seriously. I recognize the world will go on. The world, I'm not so important. What I do isn't so important. And so I better have fun doing it. And recognizing that what I am doing and what I've chosen to do, certainly since I retired from teaching, is all fun. Teaching was fun too in its own way, but it had aspects to it that weren't that much fun. So my writing, my research, every day I get up, I feel like this is another day to do what I want to do. And basically doing what you want to do means that you're playing. I think that reading Bernie's book, The Playful Path, changed some of my attitudes in certain fairly obvious ways. So for example, one of the things I do almost every day is go out for a walk with my little dog. And, I can think of it as just going out walking the dog. But, and one of the route that we often take is along a railroad track. And I think the day or two after I read A Playful Path, I decided, well, let me just let play enter into this walk along the railroad track. And I found myself, instead of just walking beside the railroad track, I found myself walking on the rail like I did when I was 8 years old. Now, I could only take about 2 steps before I'd lose my balance. When I was 8 years old, I could walk forever on the rail. But instead of getting mad at myself or thinking, oh, I'm so old, I've lost my balance, I can't walk on a rail anymore, I thought, oh, that was fun. I took 2 steps. And then I tried it again, and I took a few more steps. And then for days afterwards, I would see how many steps can I take walking along the rail. And pretty soon, by gosh, I could walk forever on the rail. 72 years old or whatever I was then, I could walk on the rail. So I wasn't thinking of it as a competition. I wasn't thinking of it even as testing myself. I was just thinking, oh, this is fun. See how many steps I could take on the rail. I could go on and talk about other things that I do, but I think that encapsulates the spirit of play that I think Bernie DeKoven articulates so well and expresses so well in his writing.
Thank you, Peter. Oh my gosh. Well, as you know, I'm going to have so many follow-up questions, but before I ask you anything, let's just hear from Bernie DeKoven himself. Bernie, go ahead and give us an introduction on you, maybe a little bit about your background, and then how play became such an important part of your life.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Peter is one of the few people who really understood my book in its entirety. And I just, I've gotten lots of wonderful reviews and very sharp insights, but Peter really understood the whole thing. And when he told me that he liked at the end of the book, there's these stories about serious and silly and navigating the inner dialogue, the inner playground, and he really understood it. And it just shocked me, that he had such a comprehensive understanding of everything that I was talking about. And I knew right then that we were like brothers in some way, that we were both navigating the same railroad track, so to speak. And so I've appreciated him. I guess anybody who writes a good review of my book, I automatically start appreciating. But Peter was really exceptional, and his work on the Aboriginal play is extremely important. Was extremely important to me. I'm always been very interested in play research, and when Peter was able to let us understand how these cultures exist in the world and have existed, and how beautiful they manage just out of a spirit of play. It's really true. These people are, their focus is, they're doing what they want to do. They're doing things, they're guided by a sense of fun in their lives. And just reading that work in Peter was just so validating. So he's just attained a certain godlike stature in my life. Brought so many for me into my understanding of what play is all about, and learning as well. And his book is just really important. So anyhow, that's Peter, and I'm so excited to be able to talk to you, Peter, for this is the first time that we really had a chance like this. It's terrific. Thank you, Lainey, for making it possible. So I really have been into play for a really, really long time. I currently attribute it to a first grade experience that I had when I was in first grade, and I got my first workbook. And I was so excited to have a workbook because they're so cool looking. The cover is all colorful, and it's your very own book, and you're allowed to write in it. I was never allowed to write in books when I was a kid, but I could write in the workbook. I thought, wow, what a privilege, what an honor, how exciting that I could do that. And then the teacher says, okay, we'll do the first 3 pages. And we're all sitting there, quietly doing our first 3 pages. And then the teacher says, everybody finished? And we said, yes. And then she said, okay, now do the next 3 pages. And I started looking around, and I said, wait a minute, is this supposed to be fun? What's going on here? And I was literally shocked that my teacher would ask me to do something, for almost the entire session, that was just so repetitive and so I felt like it was taking away something from me. It was moving me off my center, instead of delighting in what was going on. I started despairing that I was forced to continue doing this. And I had no idea why. I mean, I saw that problem before. Why was I asked to solve that problem again? Yeah, so that was the first time I realized that things should be more fun than they are, especially in education. And I mean, I was always guided by what was the things that I like to do in the name of learning were always because they were fun. They were always like play episodes. I mean, I remember my chemistry set and how much I didn't read the instructions. I just loved mixing things and seeing what they would do, which was not such a good strategy, because we did have certain very smoky, noxious substances arising from my early chemical experiments. And all those kinds of the invitations to play that came my way, they were invitations to play, and I never separated. Play and learning did not seem to be two different phenomena ever to me. They seemed to be really identical experiences. And as soon as you take one away from the other, they become totally other. The play experiences become hollow, and the learning experiences become shallow. So, hollow and shallow, that was kind of cute. Anyhow, so that was my origin into play. And really, that was like 5, 6 years old. And it stayed with me ever since. I kept on saying to myself, it's got to be more fun than this. This is ridiculous that it shouldn't be fun. And so that eventually I found my way into theater. By the time I was in high school, I was doing theater. And when I was doing theater, what I really enjoyed about theater was improvisation. And what I really enjoyed about improvisation was when there was no audience there. I just really liked a bunch of people playing together. I mean, it was just like we call it socio-dramatic play, but it's just like what kids do when they're playing house and stuff. But as an adult, or almost an adult, I had a lot more to bring to it. And so did my colleagues, the other kids who were playing with me or doing the theater thing with me. And man, I loved that experience. It was transforming. It was magical. I mean, it was really magical. We could be anything we wanted to be. And people would listen to each other so carefully, and we would, no matter what somebody said, we accepted it as being there, as real, as anything else could be real. And so I kind of that became my my model of what I wanted to do in the world, was more and more of that kind of experience of just not really being with other people and not knowing what I was going to do, but doing it anyhow, and things happening like that. And after I thought about it for a while, it was really what play is all about. That was how I understood what play is about, what play is for, and why I love play so much. It's that you enter into that improvisational space, and when you enter into it with others, it's this amazing kind of synergy of personalities and talents and we all and to be with people and to find that they're all supporting each other in whatever they're doing, and they're all accepting each other whatever they say, and there's never any no you can't do that. It's always like, well, how can I work that into what we're doing? So then, now let's cut a few years forward. I finally got a job, I'm out of school now, and I got a job, and I was teaching elementary school, and when I started teaching, this was in Media, Pennsylvania, which was kind of a fortuitous name because media is so advanced now. I was in media just before people were in media. Geographically, okay, but anyhow, it was in Media, Pennsylvania, and I was teaching, and I decided to see if I could teach everything through play. Everything. So I started teaching, uh, I was supposed to teach science and math and reading and all those kinds of things. But when we started with science, I said, well, let's make up science. Let's pretend we don't know anything about science. So what would science be? Let's do it. Well, I know one thing with science is experiments. Anybody have an idea for an experiment? That was how we started. And then with math, we made up our own number system and our own way of playing with the numbers. And with language, we started making up nonsense words and making them as real as possible. And we wrote nonsense poetry and we talked in nonsense to each other. And eventually I almost got fired because I didn't understand that I was supposed to be preparing those kids to be mainstreamed, and these kids are going to be taking tests. And if I didn't teach them how to pass those tests and be humongously successful on the tests, on the worst possible experience of being in education, and that my whole goal and purpose in life was to prepare them to take tests, I couldn't, oh my God, I just hated it. I really did. So anyhow, a couple of years later, I'm not teaching anymore. I wasn't actually fired, but I was encouraged to seek other employment in some other institution. And I found a thing, there was a new program started called the Intensive Learning Center. Now that was not a really attractive name, but that's what they called it, the Intensive Learning Center. And it was at a time, it was about 1969, something like that. And that was a time when there was actual money for education. A very brief time in our evolution, but there was actual money. And these people decided that they were going to, well, you know how it is when there's money offered, is that you really have to grab it as fast as possible and come up with projects for all that money, even though you don't know what you're going to do once the project is completed, because you have to secure that money and lay first dibs on it. So they built an amphitheater for the kids. This is elementary school. That was $250,000 at that time. That was a fortune for like what was basically an assembly room, you know. And it was beautiful. It was these carpeted nesting rings. So there's like you step up on them, and each one is wide enough that you could lie down in, and you get to the top, and then they descend. And in the middle was this beautiful parquet wood floor. And in the back of it, there was a lighting booth, and with all kinds of stuff you could adjust and change. And there's speakers enough that you could hear us like all the way across the street. We had to be careful with that. And I was in the position and I was hired to write a curriculum in theater for elementary school. What a perfect opportunity for Bernard here. So I started doing it, and I found this really great book by a woman named Viola Spolin. It was called Improvisation for the Theater. And she was really one of the first people who took improvisation seriously. And her son, Paul Sills, was like a main mover later on in the whole evolution of improv theater. And so I had the kids do some of those exercises because it was an instructional book. So there was kind of pedagogical logic behind. Am I talking too much? No. Okay. There's a pedagogical logic behind doing that they learn this exercise and they develop that skill, and I could show it all. And but as I started progressing with the kids, I started realizing, I don't really care that they learn how to do theater as I understand theater. I wanted to find out what their understanding of theater was. And so it took me longer than it should have, because I was resisting it. And as I watched the kids play, or do the exercises, I felt good about what was happening, but they always, they were nice to me. They called me Mr. Drama, which I always thought was cool. And I realized that they probably really liked the fact that they weren't in class. So they really enjoyed being down in this beautiful theater and and doing these silly things. But I made it my test that if I could go out of the room for a minute and come back in, and they were still doing what we started doing, that I would be on the right track. So we did these. So everybody's an ice cube, and now let's see if you can melt together and then figure out a way to crack apart. Would be like an exercise, right? So they started it, and it was very cute. But then the moment I left the whole thing would fall apart, and they would just kind of lie there and look stupid, or not know what to do next, or wait for the next game. So I mean, it was they were enjoying it, and I was succeeding in that level. But it was still very foreign to them. They weren't taking charge of it. They weren't owning it. So please, if I'm talking too much, you should just shut me up. I'm very open to being shut up.
I never want to shut you up, but I will ask you follow-up questions because there's so much information here. Oh my goodness, but I don't want to interrupt your stream of thought because I understand you're telling us a story. So
Yeah.
Go ahead, continue, and then I promise you I'll jump in and ask you questions when you're finished.
Thanks, Lainey. I appreciate that. Except that I keep on seeing Peter's face, and I so much want to hear what he's got to say because we never get to talk, and this is such a great experience.
Well,
Peter,
I'll tell you what. Why don't
I'll ignore him. I can do that. But you're tempting me, Peter. Okay. So anyhow, so nothing is working, and I'm trying all these like really bona fide theater exercises, and then one day out of desperation, I say, "Is there anything that you guys want to do? I mean, really, just about anything." And they said, this was like a first grade group. They said, "Yes, we want to play a game." Well, aren't we playing games? No, you're not playing a game. We want to play a real game. Well, what's a real game? Duck, duck, goose. Oh, that game. I know Duck, Duck, Goose. And, but then must tell you, I had the vision of the principal coming down and looking at the instructional program that was taking place in his $250,000 theater and noting that the kids were playing Duck, Duck, Goose. And I suddenly felt that my longevity had been shortened significantly, but as in this role, but I had to do it because I promised them. I said, "Listen, if everybody wants to do it, we'll do it." So this is kind of a long story, but I'll shut up momentarily. So because I'm getting to the good part. So they start playing Duck, Duck, Goose, and I'm watching them, and I'm being very, kind of dispassionate and observational and almost scientific in my trying not to get excited about anything they're doing and just watching. And then I walk out of the room and I come back in, and lo and behold, they're still playing the game. And then I walk out of the room, and I decide to walk out of the room for 3 minutes, 3 whole minutes. And I go out of the room, and I'm like kind of biting my nails because I'm like 3 minutes and I'm not even there. And I had to do that, I had to make that test. So I go out of the room, 3 minutes, I come back in, they're still playing Duck, Duck, Goose. Oh, so this must be a lot closer to something, because they not only are they enjoying the game very clearly, but they're maintaining it. They see a value in it. Something is going on in that game that's meaningful to them. So I come back in the room, and I'm kind of sitting there just watching it. And one of the kids says, "Hey, Mr. Drum, you want to play too?" Well, no. But how could I say no, I mean, and I felt so honored that they actually wanted to invite me into the game. So I start playing the game, and that's when I discover that part of the game is learning how to look invisible. See, there's the fox that goes around, and he goes around, he taps everybody on the head, and he says, duck, 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 duck. And then when he finds the person he wants to chase or be chased by, however variation they're playing it, he says goose. That person gets up and runs after the fox, or that person gets up and the fox runs after him. And the first person to get back to that person's seat wins that round, and the other person has to be the fox for the next round. And I did not want to be chosen because I know those little devils could outrun me immediately. I mean, I had no chance, no possible, there was no way I could play the game with them. But I tried, and I realized that as I was playing it and trying, I realized that this looking invisible was a really important thing. Like, how do you, if you don't want to get picked, you have to learn how to manifest yourself so you don't get picked. And that was one of the intersections of the play and learning experience. That was part of the core. I mean, what was so much fun about the game is that one of the things those kids were learning was how to become invisible. And 30 years later, I'm talking about it to a group of adults, and I'm in Israel. And one of the persons in that group happened to be in the concentration camp. And she said to me, when I told her about this game, because it was so important to me in my evolution, she said, well, of course, in the concentration camp, learning how to be invisible was for many people the only thing that kept them. It was the question of either life or death. You have to learn how not to be noticed. And man, I started crying, I mean, not only did she put me right there with those words, but I had the experience of wanting to look invisible in playing with the kids. And it took all that time for me to realize what a deep, profound thing that those kids were playing with that are like center to existence in the real world. So all of which is to say that the more I started playing games with them, the more I realized that this indeed is theater, that every game is kind of like a poem, and that in some way it encapsulates very complex, very significant social experiences, and that it provides children with the opportunity to play with those experiences and play with them and locate themselves within those experiences. So and every game also is really interesting to me that it's not like a simple here's the rules. It's really an encapsulation of a human relationship. It's like there's the guy that goes around saying, there's the fox, the guy that goes around saying duck duck duck. There's the people who might become the goose. There's each one of them have a different strategy and a different set of goals, and they're all working together to make this thing. So as they play the game, they're getting this kind of gestalt of all these intersecting roles and goals and complexity of human motivation, social existence. And the more I did it, the more, so I wound up with a curriculum of games. And there were 1,000 different social games involved in the curriculum, and each game had a code, so you could understand if the kids like this game, then they'll probably like this other game because it has almost the same code. It has almost the same physical activity, almost the same structure. So it's either a team game or two teams, or everybody's all in one team, or it's individuals like in hide and seek. There's only one guy who's it and everybody else is not it. And so I learned about these things and managed to do this curriculum, this 5-volume curriculum of all these games. And that's my story. That's how I got started in this whole thing.
Okay, so I have about a million questions. But before I ask the specific questions, I think it'd be really helpful if I've heard Peter speak about this before. He has defined what the criteria is of play. And I'm actually, let's go to Peter and have him give us that definition. And then Bernie, I'm going to invite you to pop in and comment and give your perspective as well, because I think you guys are coming at it from similar positions, but I also think that there are some differences too. So, Peter, why don't you take the floor for now?
Laney, would it be all right if I made some notes as Bernie was talking, and let me just comment on a few things that he said, which I think are really so profound. The, First of all, let me say something that's very sad. If you were to do this same thing today, nobody would know what Duck, Duck, Goose is, and nor would they know any other games to play. Something terribly sad. I mean, it's in some ways the first time in history children are growing up not playing with one another and not really having games to play. Fortunately, they do play computer games, which some people think is bad, but if it's the only kind of play they're doing, it's better than none by far. So that's we somehow that force for getting people to take tests as the primary goal of childhood has at least temporarily won out. And we really, really need to get this message out. Children need to play. The second thing that Bernie said that I just really want to focus on for a second as play as learning. You know, what he said is play is always learning, and it is, because when there's no learning involved, he said it becomes shallow and hollow, and it does. It's no longer fun. It's no longer play. Part of play always has some challenge to it, and that challenge has to do with the learning. So when I said at the beginning, you know, walking on that railroad track, you know, that made it play. Well, why was it play? Because it was kind of hard for me. You know, I had to learn how to do it. Once I could do it, and I was no longer, then it's no longer really play. Now it's just another way of walking, right? You know, it's only when it's learning that it was really play. And similarly, I made this claim that my writing, my speaking, this is play. But let me tell you when it's not. You know, sometimes I'll get asked to write a chapter on something that I've already written a chapter for, and I stupidly agree to do it. And then I find, oh, well, this is just really not much fun because I'm just writing stuff I already know. You know, I'm writing stuff that I've already written before. There's a little bit of challenge saying it in different words, so I'm not plagiarizing myself. But it's just not as much fun as when I'm thinking about something new and writing something new. And similarly with giving talks, I kind of have to make each talk a little different, or it gets just, this is just routine and boring. So I wanted to emphasize that point. Another point that kind of fits with what Bernie is saying, you know, so much of play, you know, it has really struck me that the things that are the most terrifying and the most terrible in real life are the things that we most enjoy playing at. So being invisible, so we're not captured, running away. You know, think of tag is the universal game. It's the universal game of all mammals. And except for predators, all mammals, including us, the preferred position is to be the one being chased. In play, there's nothing more fun than being chased. In real life, that's the worst thing we can imagine. That's our worst nightmare, being chased by some monster, being chased by some horrid, you know, by a tiger or by you know, and yet that's the most fun in play. It's no accident. You know, it's no accident that what is the most fun in play is the most terrible in real life. It's no accident that kids love to play fight. Fighting is a bad thing. But play fighting is how we deal with it. Play fighting is how we cope with this. There's actually a book, I'm not thinking of the author at the moment, on play and the Holocaust. Bernie mentioned the Holocaust person. Believe it or not, you know, some people say that play only occurs when all your other needs are met. believe it or not, kids in the Holocaust, if they were healthy enough to move around, were apparently playing, according to the documented evidence, and they played at the horrors around them. They played at the horrors as a way of learning how to cope with those things, including games that had to do with pretending that you're in a lineup and somebody comes up, you're blindfolded, and somebody comes up and hits you in the face, and then you have to figure out which one hit you. Well, the discussion in the book was about the skills that are being learned in that game that help you cope with the real lineups when you're being accused of stealing a piece of bread or something like that, and you have to hide your emotional reaction that would give you away. So there's just, it's just hard to there's no way to overemphasize that idea that play is learning. One other point that I wanted to make from what Bernie said, I love this term. Bernie invents all these wonderful words, collaboration. I love that term. It's collaboration, it's liberation. What is it liberating you from? You know what I think it's liberating you from? It's liberating you from the tendency to want to dominate other people. That's what play really does, and I think that's why in human beings play evolve. In most mammals, play only occurs in the young. An exception are the domesticated animals, dogs, which are kind of bred to be like puppies their whole lives. But most mammals, play largely occurs in the young. You can see a few exceptions. Occasionally play leaks out in older animals. But we have this capability of playing throughout life. And hunter-gatherer culture is, I've argued, based on my reading of the literature, they have this capacity to basically turn everything into play. What we call work is play. The religions are very playful. They're not serious and somber like our religion, like monotheistic religions are. The gods are whimsical and playful, and they bring the gods out in their ceremonies and basically play with the gods, and the gods are play companions, and so on. And I think that this idea that our basic human nature came about because of this capacity to play in adulthood. Our species is the only species certainly the only species of primate that is capable of a high level of cooperation, the kind of cooperation that would lead to language, that would lead to culture as we know it and passing culture along. No other species is capable of that, and I think that it's because of this capacity to play and set aside dominance. You look at other primates and they're constantly squabbling with one another. They can't really cooperate in any lengthy time, except temporarily cooperating to sort of form gangs to gang up on a common enemy. And when we overcame that in hunter-gatherer times. We didn't totally overcome it genetically, as we can see, because we still have these strong tendencies to dominate, and it leads to war and so on. So at any rate, let me address what you were asking me to talk about, Lainey, which is that a definition of play. And so to me, play, this is not exactly my invention, but I came to it by looking at the ways different play scholars over the years have talked about play and defined play, and bringing a little bit of my own thought to it. So I've written about play as an activity that has these 5 components to it. If it's pure play, it has all of these components. The first is that it's self-chosen and self-directed. That's why that game of Duck, Duck, Goose was play, and when Bernie was doing his thing, it was not totally play. It was he was directing it. He was in some sense telling them what to do, and even if they were having fun to some extent, they weren't choosing it themselves. They weren't directing it themselves. It's when so play is something you have chosen, you have directed. That has an interesting aspect to it. Kids normally like to play with other kids. Solo play is fairly unique to our world. Of course, everybody likes to play themselves sometimes. You know, when you're doing something artistic, there's some kinds of things you just want to be solo immersed. You don't want to have any other people bothering you when you're doing it. But for the most part, kids want to play with other kids. That's because we're social animals, and the most important things we have to learn are how to get along with other people. So nature built us so that we want to play with other kids. Well, if play is self-directed, if self-chosen and self-directed, but it's also social, that means you've got to figure out together what you want to play and how to play. And so play then becomes the vehicle for learning how to negotiate. How do I get my needs met while also making sure that you get your needs met? Because if I fail at that, you're going to leave me. You're going to go off and play with somebody else, and I'm going to be left alone. Well, that's a natural consequence, which is a sort of natural punishment for me not paying any attention to you. So that's that first aspect of play, self-directed and self-chosen and self-directed. Second aspect of play is that play always has rules. There's no such thing as unstructured play. Play is always structured. It's never random. It's just piling things up randomly. That's not play. Play always, there's something that you have in mind that you're trying to do. And that's what gives it structure. So if you're building something, you have in mind some kind of design or thing you're building. If you're playing a game, there are certain rules to the game. The rules may or may not be stated. Even rough and tumble play fighting, it may look wild, but it's guided by rules. You don't fight, you don't kick, you don't. If you're the stronger of the two, you have to restrain yourself. So play always involves a certain amount of restraint, the ability to abide by rules. And the great Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky, in his view, that was the big lesson of play, is how to control yourself. We human beings, unlike other animals, I suppose, we have to control our instincts and our whims to get along with one another in society. That's the nature of human society. We even say that a person is like an animal if they can't control their whims and their instincts. Well, Vygotsky pointed out that in play, children are constantly practicing controlling their instincts and whims. There are always rules. You can't do just anything in play. Isn't that interesting? Children freely and voluntarily in play put themselves into a situation where they are no longer free, where they now have to follow these rules. Isn't that fascinating? And they do it of their own free will. We don't have to teach kids how to follow rules. They learn it in play, and that's how they really learn it. Third characteristic of play is that there's always some element of imagination to it. Play is, and the imagination is in some sense the flip side of the rules. In play, you put yourself out of the real world to some extent. You think of yourself now, it's about the real world. It has to do with coping with the real world in some sense, but you are not in the real world. And because you're not in the real world, you are now in what might be called a simulation world. It's a world where you're sort of free to try things out. And the reason that you're free to try things out is because it doesn't count. It doesn't really, nobody is keeping score. In the long run, nobody's keeping score. Nobody's evaluating you. There's no A's, B's, there's no gold stars, there's no trophies, it doesn't go on your resume. And because of that, you are completely free to fail. There's another characteristic. I should have listed it as number 2. I usually list this as number 2. I forgot about this one. So the number 2 characteristic, which precedes the last 2 I just described, is that play is intrinsically rewarding rather than extrinsically rewarding. When we're not playing, we're doing things to get things. You know, we're doing what we have to do to get that paycheck or to get the A on the report card or at least a passing grade on the report card, or whatever it is that we're scratching an itch to get rid of the itch, or whatever it is we're doing for the goal. And when you're doing something for the goal, you take the least effortful way you can do to get the goal. I'm going to do the least work I could possibly do to get that A in the course if I'm not taking a playful attitude to the course. I'm just taking a work-related approach. My goal is to get an A, and what's the least I can do to get the A? And that's the typical way that students approach courses, believe it or not, whether it's in the lower grades or whether it's in college. This is what because we make learning work in that context. The idea is to do the least work possible to get the reward you want, which means learning the least you can to get the A or whatever it is. So it's intrinsically rewarding, which means that you're doing it for its own sake, and you're doing it just because it's fun. And as I just said, the reason it's fun is because there's learning involved. And so isn't it interesting that in our formal learning environments, we call it work, we turn it into work, and we take away, play becomes, if anything, recess, a break from learning, instead of really the vehicle of learning. And then finally, the fifth characteristic of play is that it is conducted in a non-stressed, or at least not highly stressed, frame of mind. And the reason for that is because if it becomes too stressful, if whatever you're doing becomes too awful, you quit. Just as you're always, I've often said the biggest freedom in play is freedom to quit. If you're not free to quit, it's no longer play. And so you're climbing that tree and you're having fun and you're testing your ability to handle fear, but at some point the fear becomes too great and then you come down. Or you're playing some game and there's some hitting involved and so on and so forth, and you say to yourself, this is just going a little too far in this direction, and so I'm going to quit. I'm going to, I just remembered I hear my mother calling and it's time to go home for supper now, And so the fact that you've got this, you're in a mental state in which you are fully alert, fully mentally involved in what you're doing, but you're not overly stressed about it. That's a mental state that some researchers refer to as flow. And the research on flow shows that this is the mental state that is the best mental state for learning new things, for thinking out of the box, for thinking creatively, for solving insight problems. This is the mental state of flow. And it's interesting to me that the very first use of the term flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi was in an article about play. Subsequently, he wrote a whole book on flow. Many other articles about flow never mentioned play in it. And I think this tells us something about, sadly, about research, that if you want to be taken seriously, you find some other term other than play to talk about what you're writing about. And we've got to get back to using that term play, because that's really, really what a lot of this is all about.
Wow. Well, first of all, I've heard you define the definition of play before based on those 5 variables, and I think that's an amazing way to look at it. But talking about the actual scientific research, this goes a little bit into what Bernie talks about with the shame of play. So as adults, there's a social conditioning that play is something to be sort of ashamed of or to be embarrassed about, especially from an adult perspective. And if indeed we cannot take play seriously in terms of an necessary evolutionary step as a human being, then where are we?
That's it. Let me just to reinforce that point, Lainey. You know, when I first began reading the hunter-gatherer literature, I talked to one of my colleagues who happens to have been a person who's contributed to that literature. She lived with a hunter-gatherer group for at various times and many months in total. And I said, my conclusion from everything I'm reading here is that the hunter-gatherer cultures were very playful. And she said, but we don't use the word playful. And I said, I had also commented, but they're not using the word play. And she said, why not? And I said, why not to her? And she said, it's because people take that as an insult. It's like you're insulting the hunter-gatherer cultures. You're calling these people childish if you say they're playful. So isn't that interesting? you know?
So Bernie, I was wondering if you had anything to add, because I know later in your life you started off working with children in play, but you have focused on working with large groups of adults in play. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So my second chapter in the Intensive Learning Center was I had finished the curriculum and now I had to teach teachers how to use the curriculum. It's called dissemination. I was engaged in disseminating the curriculum. So I managed to get like 45 minutes to teach them everything I knew, which I thought was not an insignificant accomplishment because, and this is a true story. So I have to say it's true because I was taken aback by it. So I come there and I have a series of 7 games that I want to play with them, each kind of representative of a different way of playing. So they have an understanding of how the curriculum is structured and how they can use the coding to better figure out what kind of game they might want to suggest to the kids. And it's always suggestion, it's never, we're going to play this now, but hey, do anybody know how to this game? And if the kids say, oh yeah, let's play that, then that's the guide. So I started naturally with Duck, Duck, Goose. I figure if we could get through Duck, Duck, Goose, we can get through anything. These are all teachers. So we start playing Duck, Duck, Goose, and then I notice that the time is going by pretty fast. And if we continue with the game, I won't be able to play anything else. So I stop the game and I start saying, okay, well, here's the next game. You understand what Duck, Duck, Goose is, and now let's play the next game. Somebody says, but I didn't get my turn. And she was like dead earnest, this person, because she really didn't get her turn and she really wanted to play and it wasn't fair. You're not being fair. It's just another kind of game related word, but I didn't want to explore that at the time. So the fact was that 45 minutes later, when my time was actually over and I wasn't allowed to play anymore, we were still playing Duck, Duck, Goose because everybody wanted to play and nobody felt that they had played it enough. And that was my first sense that maybe it's even more important in the adult world than it is in the children's world. More important to adults because adults are more play deprived than children. Children, if given the opportunity, will play. They don't need permission. They just need to be left alone and left to each other. But adults are like, as Peter was saying, they're kind of embarrassed about play. They don't want to call what they're doing play, let alone call it games, let alone call it Duck, Duck, Goose, and so the more I thought about it, the more I thought maybe the adults are the culprit in this whole system. Maybe the reason why children aren't playing more and learning more from the play experience is because adults don't recognize it as a valid experience. They don't understand what's going on with it. And that's because they don't understand it in their own lives. And that if I'm going to really do anything that's of value in the world, the thing I should be doing is helping adults, exposing adults to play. And so that So I wound up buying a farm, 25-acre farm. We called it the Games Preserve, and we made it into kind of the ultimate play space for adults. They could take it really, we had a lot of adult games. And I mean, not what you call adult games, but you know, like a really good ping pong table with just like the perfectly thick paddles and just the right bounce ball with the lighting coming down on the table. And we had a billiards table with like the slate was like 3/4 of an inch thick, wonderful, and the felt on top of it was utterly smooth with not even a little nayness in the thing. And as we evolved the Games Preserve, we were very fortunate in getting more and more games until you got to the point where you'd walk in, and that was all in the barn, which was a 40 by 40, so it was a big, big space. And that it was impossible not to find something that would give you permission to play, no matter who was there, because of all those games. And you've seen those games and you know those games. Then there were the unusual games and puzzles, and eventually the repertoire of games that we had really got larger and larger and more expansive, and could be applied to many different interests that adults have. And we wound up working with, first of all, I worked with, there's a play scholar named Brian Sutton Smith, who happened to worked in Philadelphia at the time. And I had followed his work because he wrote a book called The Study of Games with Elliot Avedon, which turned out to be one of my better sources for more games. I mean, and they were real games. I got involved with anthropologists at the time because there was this group of anthropologists called the Association for the Study of Play. And they were not afraid to use that word in their identity, but they were all pretty much uniformly ignored by their colleagues, because it's the Association for the Study of what? You know? and I mean, I just really, I admired those people so much that they were willing to be frowned upon, because they didn't care. They knew that play was important and they were willing to pursue it. And they did these marvelous, like actual eyewitness reports of people at play, of like hunter-gatherer communities, of just people in the city, of urban people, and it was invaluable to me. For example, there was Iona and Peter Opie, who wrote a book called Children's Games in Streets and Playground, and they were actual scientific observations of children at play. So everything was clear, everything was there. They omitted nothing. If there was cruelty, they talked about that. If there was affection, they talked about that. There was nothing that they would, they were like real scientists. So that was very exciting to me to find out that there was such resources in the adult world. And then I went on, and we had, aside from Brian started bringing his class. Brian Sutton Smith started bringing his class to the farm, which was a 90-minute drive, but it was perfect. I mean, the guy was like a genius, Brian, and he was like such a scholar that he actually talked in footnotes. I mean, he really did. And I felt so sorry for those poor kids, because I don't know how you could possibly listen to him and remember anything, because he was like, he would talk about something and then he'd rattle off like 20 references to that particular idea that appeared in various forms of literature. But that experience of coming to the farm and playing was something that that everybody could understand. So for Brian, it was a way for him really to light the fire for those kids, to get them really engaged, and to help them identify themselves as players. And then we had other groups. We had like prison guards. And that was there was a big prison called Graterford Prison in Pennsylvania. And it was really, I mean, it was a high security prison, but these guards really cared about the prisoners. And they wanted to introduce something that would help the prisoners socialize a little bit. I wanted to say something about that the the curriculum, my curriculum, the thing that it really did that we could really show evidence for is that it was kind of like a course of social literacy for children. That the children, mostly when kids are in school, they're not really allowed to socialize. And it's a pretty thorough ban about socialization. You don't talk to, you're sitting in rows and you don't talk to the kid across the row from you because you'll get caught. And you're in fear of whispering something or passing a note because you get caught. And when you go to the lunchroom, you got 15 minutes to eat, and you're not supposed to really talk, and definitely not get up out of your chair. And when you go to recess, if you're fortunate enough to actually have a school that still has recess, it's the same kind of thing. You're not allowed to. You have so little time to actually play that if you actually are able to organize the game, by the time it gets organized and you have been able to make sure the ball doesn't get taken away from you before the period is over, either by another teacher or by kids, it's too late. So there's a thorough disabling of children in terms of learning social skills. And I did not realize that what I was doing was so revolutionary, because I thought, look, this is a basic need. If you put kids in school, what you're doing is you're socializing them. That's what it's all about. It's the social experience that is the prime focus of education. And if you can't recognize that, you don't understand what education is all about. And anyhow, I'm ranting a little bit, excuse me. But the point is that the more I explored adult play, the richer that experience got for me. I really understood that, we can play as adults in ways that we could never play as children because we have so much more to play with. We have all those years of experience, all those years of denotation and connotation, of subtlety and social cues and sophistication, and our repertoire of play episodes increases, and we have, we understand what games are. We know we can even make up our own games. We know that we're conscious of the need to play, and we accept it, so anyhow, that's that. So I really got excited about working with adults. Then along came an organization called the New Games Foundation. This was in the mid-70s, that was started by Stuart Brand, who was one of the fomenters of the hippie movement. And he compiled these books called the Whole Earth Catalog, which were, you remember those? They were lists of like all kinds of reviews of like the best furnace you could possibly get. And I love that book. I love all of those books. And so Stuart created the New Games Foundation as a kind of alternative way of manifesting your freedom. We were doing a lot of protests, but this was much more a demonstration than a protest, a demonstration of our freedom to play. And so the New Games event, we would have maybe 1,000 people, 2,000 people. Everything that we would do were these games. All the focus of the games was not on winning, but was on having fun. And the basic rule structure was just like Peter was talking about. You could always quit, and there was no problem with quitting. In fact, later on at the Games Preserve and later on in my classes, we used to have quitting practice, because I really wanted to be sure that everybody knew that it was okay to quit. So I would say, all right, we're going to play 3 games, and you have to quit at least one of them before the session is over. Just to find out how it feels. Because once that permission to quit was established, then so was the permission to play established. Because everybody knew that they were playing because they wanted to play, not because they felt that they had to play or were forced to play, that it was a voluntary act. And that was because otherwise they would never take ownership of it. And if they didn't take ownership of it, there was nothing to teach them. They really have to take ownership of it, because they have to say somewhere in their consciousness that I chose to do that. I myself, in my full adulthood, decided that I really wanted to play Duck Duck Goose. You know? And I decided, and I played that Duck Duck Goose. And yes, I was a goose, but I didn't care. I played anyhow, and I was one of the better gooses in the whole flock. So,
Bernie, can I interrupt you just for a quick second?
No, don't interrupt me.
Speaking about adults and play, so I work with adolescents, and I find, just from my own personal experience, in the beginning, when there's an invitation to play, there's the social worry of looking stupid. Has that shifted? Does that shift from childhood all the way up to sort of self-awareness to adolescence into adulthood? And how does play help you overcome that?
First of all, I advertise many of my games as games that help you look stupid. So, so there's no question about it. No, really, I've been calling them funny games. I used to call them pointless games. I call them silly games. But the whole idea of the games is that like there's this game. Let me tell you about a game that actually used to play it at new games during these big tournaments with thousands of people. But this would maybe be 50 people at a time. That was called Sound and Fury, and it's a stupid game. And so you're standing in a circle. One person, when it's your turn, you make a sound and a motion. Any sound and any motion you want. Like you go, bleh! And then everybody makes that same sound and motion. So everybody goes, bleh! Then the next person's turn, and that person makes another sound and a different sound and a different motion. On and on around the circle, do it a few times. And it's like almost a perfect model of what a co-liberating experience is like, because the crazier your sound and motion, the more you free other people to make crazier sounds and motion. So as the game plays, it gets sillier and crazier and more embracing and makes people laugh harder. And I found that if I let people know that this game is really pointless, is really silly, if I can do anything I can to debase the value of the game or its significance or its political implications, and just say, look, we're playing this because it's fun, then I do that whenever possible. A lot of the games that are most successful games were the ones that were the humor plays a very important role in keeping games playful. So practically all the games that's why I call it funny games, because practically all the games that if you enter into a game with that sense of that this is going to be funny, then your heart becomes lighter, and the fear of being seen playing kind of disappears, because you're no longer you already know that you can't be taken seriously.
So going back to what Peter Gray was saying about play needing to be self-organized and creating their own sets of rules, do you see that adults have the ability to step in and create that kind of play for themselves? Or is that only something that kids have the freedom to do, and that adults, when consciously coming to play, need some sort of outside organization?
Well, one of the reasons why I built the Games Preserve was because I thought it was important to create the permission to play for the adults. And seeing all those games, they kind of symbolize the permission to play. Oh, I know what that billiard table is for. It's for play. It's for a game. I know what that dartboard is for. I know what that air hockey game is for. Everything was like, however, the fact is that most of the sessions that we had, we didn't use those things at all. They were all just like playing with people. No equipment needed. But the permission was needed, and that's what the whole edifice was built for, was to establish that clearly and vividly in people's minds.
And are some people just naturally more playful than others? Can you talk about that?
You know, I would like to actually talk about the word playful, because playful did not really come into my vocabulary until I found that word. And I was I'm kind of a poet, so, you know, words are very important to me. And I started out like, oh, play, I love play. Play is really good. But then play stopped working so well, because just like Peter had to go through 5 different definitions, it's so hard to define. And everybody who studies play, you know, they begin their paper with another odious definition of play. Not that your definition was odious in any way, Peter. It was brilliant. And I loved it. But, you know, because they feel like they have to define play. Nobody knows what play is. I'm going to tell you what play is. But so play was, you know, after a while I didn't like that word anymore, because it's used for so many things that have nothing to do with play. So I started liking the word games, and then I came across the word playful. And I realized that playful is a state of something, mind, character, being, I don't know what, but it's some kind of state that we can get into that transcends. It's not just confined to games. It's like everything we do, anything we do, we can do playfully. And once we understand that and take that freedom to do that, then the humor comes back into our lives. Then we become open to the spontaneity, to the unpredictability of ourselves, to each other. We become more open to each other because we know how to engage. We understand what that playful relationship is. And you know, I've been married for 51 years almost. And having a relationship that long, you can see how the playfulness enters the whole picture and creates, you know, it's so central to the success of our marriage, to wanting to be together, just that we can be playful together, that we can joke together, and anyhow, that was for me, writing The Playful Path was a real moment for me, because I was able to take that word playful and really understand that it is a path. It's actually, in a way, it's like a discipline. And if you can just remember to be a little bit playful when you have the chance, you can kind of save your spiritual life, you know, because so often, you know, like I'm playing, even when I'm playing with a kid, you know, and the kid is playful, but I'm taking it too seriously because I don't remember to be playful with the kid. And all of a sudden everything becomes tragic, you know, and there I am, and we're playing checkers, and I am doing my best to prove to the kid that I am a better checker player. And I have to stop myself and say, what the heck am I doing here? What has it got to do with this kid and with this me and with this relationship that we're trying to pursue of playfulness and co-liberation and shared joy, which is all that's important. Who cares who wins the checkers game?
Let me also comment on the word playful. I've often said, and although I probably need to backtrack a little bit on it, is that play as a noun is something that probably is always going to apply more to kids than adults. Adults, you know, we have real responsibilities. There are certain things we've got to do in life. We've got to earn a living. We've got to take care of our kids. You know, we got to do all these things. So there's always a realistic, extrinsic goal to much of what we're doing. So, you know, I'm writing a book, or I'm doing this or that, and I'm doing it partly to earn some money. It's not just purely intrinsically reinforcing. And nowadays, that's more likely than in the past. Kids have the luxury and also the need to truly play by all of those points of my definition And they need that. That's how they grow up. That's how they practice all the skills of adulthood. That's how they learn. That's how they're simulating life in doing that. We adults don't need that so much. I think that I agree with Bernie. It's good for us to be able to do it some, to really actually really play. But what we can do is to everything we're doing, no matter how much it is something that we feel we have to do, we can bring a playful attitude to it. It doesn't have all those 5 points of play, but we can bring a playful attitude to it. And I think that's what hunter-gatherers do. Yeah, they've got to hunt, they've got to gather, but they bring a playful attitude. They've got to solve their problems. They've got to, yesterday I was doing something that I could have, there were times when I just hated what I was doing. I was moving some junk for somebody that really shouldn't have been moved. It should have been thrown away long ago. And I was sort of cursing about why wasn't this thrown away and why am I spending an entire day moving this person's junk from one place to another. And there's nothing here worth saving. There's no reason why I should be spending this entire day. And I just decided at some point, wait a minute, I'm doing this. I agreed to do it. And I might as well have fun doing it. And so let me figure out, I'm no longer moving people's junk. I'm exercising my muscles. I'm lifting stuff. I'm driving a truck. Here I am. I'm driving a truck. I don't often drive a truck. I've got this whole day to lift stuff and to drive a truck. And suddenly, I was no longer mad at this person who was asking me to move their stuff for them. And I think that if we can just step back and take that attitude, in our marriages, we get into these spats. If we can just think, wait a minute, I just really love this person, and even this thing about this person that's annoying me right now, this is kind of fun. This is part of life. This is sort of a game of life, and let's enjoy it. So I do think it's helpful to use the word playful, because play implies to me at least, it implies that whole constellation of things where it really doesn't have, it's not accomplishing anything other than the learning aspect of what you're doing. Whereas we adults, we do need to accomplish things. We need to make commitments, follow through on those commitments. We need to, support our family. We need to do all things. But we can do all of that playfully, or we could do it with bitterness. And it's so much more fun to do it playfully.
And I think to your point, the actual ability to play and have free play as a child helps you access that playfulness as an adult.
I think that's true.
But I'd like to add that there's a book by Bergson, I think it is. Bergson? He was the son or the nephew of Henri. I can't remember his name. Anyhow, he talks about playful play. And I thought that was a really brilliant distinction to make, that some play is not playful, but some play is playful. And the very stuff of the games that I teach and that we taught during New Games were playful play. And when you see people engage in playful, adults, communities engage in playful play for an hour, 2 hours, whatever, or when you experience that, what you experience is something very close to utopia. Because, I mean, those people they're just people, total strangers. They don't know each other. They don't necessarily trust each other. And they're like rolling on the floor like puppies, rolling all over each other with just sheer delight and abandon and a sense of collaboration and freedom. And it's beautiful. It's like, if you want to demonstrate, if you want to make a demonstration to the political institutions of the world, that's what you should be demonstrating, our capacity as human beings to create, that we can become beautiful together. We can become so free, so profoundly playful that we raise to a new level. And we can, and we'll take a blind person, sure, come in and play. We'll take a black person or any color, any shape, any ability. We can play with them all and include them in the game and have more fun that way.
Yeah, and I think you just touched on it. It is the key to creating a good life. So before we run out of time, I want to ask this question to both Bernie, you and Peter. If indeed, speaking of creating a better life, if you had a magic wand that you can wave over, let's just focus it on the American education system. How would you not transform it from where it is, point A to point B, and I don't want to hear how we'll get there. I want to hear what your magic wand would transform the education system into and what it would look like. So, Bernie, why don't you answer that first?
Because I want to hear what Peter has to say.
Okay, Peter, why don't you answer that first?
Yeah, well, this is something I write about all the time, so so I've got a kind of a ready answer. I mean, I've seen what I would transform it to. I've seen it work. Um, children are children come into this world designed to educate themselves. They come into the world designed to educate themselves through exploration and play, curiosity and playfulness, and sociability. I think of that, these three basic human drives that are in some sense at their peak in childhood and throughout childhood. These are the educative drives. These are the curiosity leads children to want to understand the world around them. They're constantly, from the moment they're born, they're exploring the world around them. So curiosity is the drive to see what's out there and what can I do with it. Everything that they touch, they want to know what they can do with it. They want to understand the people around them. That's part of the social drive. Who are these people? What do they know? What can I learn from them? And so curiosity, playfulness, I think of as the drive to practice things. Play is doing things. It's practicing. You're practicing all constructive play. You're practicing building things. Imaginative play. You're playing with hypotheticals. What if this were true? Then what else would have to be true? You can run through all the basic human skills and you can see that children, when they're free to play in all of those things. They play with language. They play physically to build their bodies. We don't have to educate children. All we have to do is give them the environment that they need to educate themselves. Now, in a hunter-gatherer culture, this can happen pretty naturally because that environment is all there. They can see everything that adults do. They can experience the whole culture. In our culture, it doesn't happen so naturally. So I think in our culture, we need to set up special, we can call them schools if we want, or learning centers. We could call them play centers, places where kids can get together, where there can be some adults who know different things, where they can experience, there's all the tools of the culture available. You can play with them. How do you learn to use any tool? You play with it, which means you act creatively with it. You do your own thing with it. You don't just do some set of exercises with it. You do your own thing with it. So, and I write about this, and in my book, Free to Learn, I describe it that this exists, and it's existed for a long time. It's been proven to work, absolutely works. It's just that the world needs to start paying attention to this.
Now that was beautiful, Peter. Exactly. I would like to see the word fun be used more as a criteria for a successful environment, a successful educational environment. And I would especially like to see it used by children, but also by the people who administer that environment and say to each other, boy, these kids are having a lot of fun, aren't they? And say, okay, well, then we're succeeded. And That's all I have to add.
That's a really good point. I was in Germany and Bavaria talking with government officials about how to evaluate an education program. And I tried to convince them. I said, well, the first thing to look at is whether the children are happy. And if they're not happy, it's automatically a failure. That's the first question. The second question you might want to ask is, in the long run, do these happy children grow up to be able to take care of themselves, to get a job, to do the things that they need to do? And that's the long run measure. That all the testing in between is only really a measure of have they learned to pass tests. So, but I think actually if kids are happy and they're in an environment where the best of the culture is reflected, you've got the tools, you've got adults who are models of morality, you've got a system for settling conflicts, you've got people with different ideas expressing those ideas. That's all you have to do. You just provide that environment.
I think at that point, that would be one of the points where I would be an advocate for schools. So I'm going to just keep my fingers crossed that I get to see that in my lifetime. It's a beautiful vision. I know it does exist. I want to shift gears just one more time and ask you guys about a very important topic that is very current. What is the role of electronic games, video games, or other games that are designed to entertain or engage with kids, teens, and even adults these days? Is that part an important part of play? And can you talk a little bit about, why electronic or video games should be included in a play curriculum? I don't even want to use the word curriculum, but a play environment?
Well, I have professionally, I've designed computer games. And one of the first things I learned about what goes on in a computer game is that basically most of them are, you engage in what I call learning by dying. That's basically what happens. You're in some kind of space and things are shooting at you and you're shooting at things. And you have to be able to, and sooner or later you're going to die. And what you have to do, and it always takes you by surprise, and you have to be able to have seen enough of what's going on in the moment before you're surprised, so that next time you can remember exactly that situation, which is very difficult to remember because there are all these things moving around, distracting you, the sounds and the music and things flashing. You have to remember, if you can remember exactly what happened just before you got killed, you can avoid it the next time. And that's basically the kind of learning structure that's built into most computer games. So I feel that that is what's going on, that I believe is of significant educational value. I have maybe a couple of things to talk about here. Another thing is that when you figure out how to play a game and how to succeed a game in a computer game, it's very, very similar to figuring out how to work Facebook or how to do Twitter or how to do just about anything else on it. So all of those games are, in a way, are really excellent vehicles for helping children learn the processes that they need to learn in order to work with the computer and do everything else on the computer. And the third thing is, I've been very fortunate to go to a lot of these computer fairs like Indiecade, and where they have computer games. And the fact is that recently, the last 5 years at least, there have been more and more games that involve physical engagement as well as just virtual engagement. And and it's beautiful to watch all these game designers who are really talented game designers start putting in these kinds of social aspects of games that encourage people to interact in many different ways. And some of them are just like, are so much fun and so funny that people are laughing all the time they play. So we need to be aware that when we start talking about computer games, we're no longer talking about just that thing that's on the screen. That we're talking about like whole communities of players who are engaged in dialogue with each other, sometimes physically, sometimes just through chat, and they're helping each other learn. They're talking about, you know, little things that they've learned how to do in a game and how to avoid traps and whatever. They're recommending other games, so there's a whole other it's a much bigger phenomenon than we really as adults we tend to identify as part of the computer game environment. So I think that's really important, that Lainey, that you need to start looking at the wider phenomenon of all the things that surround the nature of playing with the computer. And I think you'll begin to see things that will stir your little educational heart. Yes. Okay, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Bernie said. And you know, when I give talks on play, I generally don't talk about computer play. And then the first question is the question you just asked: is that actually play? And I think most of the people are asking expect me to agree that they should be limiting their children's opportunity to play or should be banning computer games, because after all, I'm an advocate for outdoor play, and isn't the computer the enemy of outdoor play, and so on and so forth is kind of the attitude that people have. At first, when people ask that question, I didn't really know how to answer it. I'm not a computer gamer myself, although my son, who's a middle-aged man now, has always been. I mean, he grew up with it. He was in the generation where you built your own little computer kit, and has been a longtime advocate of the games and plays them today. But I didn't know, and people talk about it being addictive. People talk about all this stuff. And so I decided, well, let me look and see. I'm a researcher after all. That's my job, is to look at the research literature. Has there been research on this stuff? And so I kind of made a list of all the claims. I actually first did a Google search, the negative effects of computer games. I found socially isolating, creates obesity, rots the mind, you know, I mean, all the things, and addictive, causes violence or inure to violence, ran through the list, and then I said, well, can I do any of these cite any references? Can I find any research that supports this idea? And basically, when I did the research, when I looked at the research, I really found precious little research, and it was sort of shaky research at best that supported any of these claims about the negative effects of playing video games. And I found a good deal of research showing positive effects. Not surprisingly, as Bernie just pointed out, not surprisingly, kids who play video games are less socially isolated in our culture today than those who don't. They're talking about video games. You know, you're kind of out of things if you're a boy who doesn't play video games. You're kind of socially out of things. This is what people talk about. They're often playing the games with other people, either online or directly with them. They're talking about these games when they're not playing them. So, and there's also, in fact, there's one study that was done that showed that kids who played video games are not less likely, they're actually more likely to also play outside. And these are kids who have opportunity to play. They're allowed to play outside. They're allowed to play video games. There's no correlation with obesity, and so on and so forth. So I ended up, and also there's now quite a lot of evidence for cognitive benefits of video games, that you're practicing basic cognitive skills. I I've come to the conclusion I probably ought to take up video games. And as I get older and losing my memory, it boosts your memory capacity, boosts your ability to pay attention to a lot of things and so on. So I'm an advocate of computer play. On the other hand, I think that I think that there are kids who play on the computer who would, if they had the option, be spending more time outdoors than they currently are. And, you know, our instinctive reaction when we see kids who are on the computer all the time and we think that they should be outdoors is to think, well, we have to ban the computer. We have to limit computer time. We have to put one more limit on our children. That's the way we always think. We have to limit our children's opportunities. And my argument is, no, what we have to do is expand their opportunities. We have to enlarge the menu. And I think a lot of kids who are on the computer all the time, and they say this in surveys that have been done, they would be playing outdoors if there were other kids to play with outdoors, and if they could get away from adults and really play outdoors. But we've created a world where that's not possible for many kids. And we don't allow them outdoors. We more or less ban children from public spaces unless there's somebody there watching them and guarding them. And kids need to get away from adults. And if the only way you can get away from adults and play is online, then that's how you're going to play. So if we want to create more balance, more of an outdoor, add more outdoor play to kids' life, we have to make outdoor play really possible and really attractive once again. And that means somehow we have to create a world where children are attracted to the outdoors, where they're out there with other kids, where when they go out, they'll find other kids, and there's no adult standing there telling them what to do.
Yes.
I just want to add that I guess it was about a year ago we filmed an episode about this topic, and Peter, you were on that panel, and I'll link to that in the show notes page as well, because it was a really great episode with a panel of teens and parents and you talking about video games too. So I just want to make sure that our audience knows that. I want to actually go to each of our panelists and ask you to give us some closing thoughts. So our audience generally are parents, and parents that are interested in supporting their children. Either their children are in school, or they're alternatively educating their children, or they're interested in doing so in the future. So your closing thought will be aimed at a parent on ways to support their children, especially through play, since that is the topic of this show. So closing thoughts directed at parents about play. And then after you're finished with your closing thoughts, I'm going to invite both Bernie and Peter to share your projects, anything that you're working on, websites, books, anything at all. I'd like to give you time and space to talk about those things as well. So Peter or Bernie, either of you are welcome to jump in and closing thoughts and projects and websites.
When I was trying to help other adults get back into the sense of play and fun in their lives, one of the things I started doing was asking them to make a list of all the things that they do that are fun for them. And it turned out to be a very illuminating experience for them, because it's not something that you think of often. What do I do that's actually fun? And if you allow yourself to make a nice exhaustive list, then all kinds of things appear to you about what's fun for you, about the nature of fun in your life, and about how you can have more fun, because they're in your list. All those things are in your list. And then we extended that to making a list with your child. And so you ask your child, tell me what the things that let's make a list of all the things that you do that are fun for you. And here's my list of all the things that I do that are fun for you. And let's add to both of those lists the things that we do that are fun for each other. And I think that's a really good start because the query, the investigation is now following a word which is kind of difficult to define, but you know what it means, that word fun. And it's a little bit easier to swallow than the word play because fun has such a little regard in our culture. So you can just say, oh, this is fun. I like that's fun. And this is fun. And then as it gets, as you really allow yourself to get deeper into it, it becomes a very rich repository of behaviors, projects, opportunities for fun that you can share. And I would say that's the key. What you're really looking for are ways you can share fun with your children. That's a shared fun. You're having fun together. I'm not talking about going to amusement parks or Hawaii or whatever you think is going to be fun, but the things that you and your children identify that both of you identify as fun, whether it's building Lego blocks or Tinker Toys or playing with the computer, whatever is fun for both of you is where you need to start. And if you follow that, it's going to take you to a richer environment for all of you involved.
I just want to add to what Bernie said that, we've kind of created a society where parenting, this verb parenting, to parent, is a chore. it's it's like this thing where your job is to shape a child into something. It's like there's a wonderful new book by Alison Gopnik called something like The Carpenter and the Gardener, in which she said we've sort of taken a carpenter mode to parenting, and we use this word parenting like you're a carpenter, like you're building your child. And she says a gardener mode would be a better mode where we're just kind of creating the environment and the child grows himself or herself. And I think we need to get back to recognizing that children are human beings right from the beginning. They really are fully formed human beings right from the beginning. They know what they need. They know what they want. They know they know how to grow. We just need to provide the environment in which they can do so. And the other thing that I would say to parents is, we are living at a time that has many, many advantages. We can cure diseases that we couldn't cure before. We're becoming a more tolerant society in many ways than we've been in the past. I don't have any desire to go back to the 1950s, when I was a kid. But in one sense, we have become a worse society. And that is that we have sort of, we are preventing children from being children. And in some sense, for the first time in history, except for times of intense child labor and child slavery, children are not being allowed to just play with other kids in a culture of childhood, which is how children are designed to grow up. And I think there's several reasons for it. Part of it is we've bought into the idea that it's so fearful out there, that there are all these dangers out there, that children can't just be let out to play. And then secondly, we have bought into the idea that it's our job as children, as adults, to somehow get our kid into Harvard or Stanford or some such school. And so we've turned childhood into a period of resume building rather than the joyful experience of play. I mean, resume building is the opposite of play. Resume building is all about doing certain things that are going to go on your record, whereas play is always off the record. It's always what you're doing for your own sake. I think what parents need to ask themselves is, what do I really and truly want for my child? One way to think of it is, in the end, what do you want on your gravestone? Do you want he made it into Harvard? Or do you want something like he was a friend? He was a good person. He was a moral man or a moral woman. She was. And if that's what you want, and I really think that every parent in their heart, if they stop and think about it, that's what they want. And then how do you produce that? You don't produce that by making sure that they can read at the age of 4 or by thinking that a test in mathematics has nothing to do with that. These are the kinds of skills that children develop in play. It's in play that children learn how to be friends. They learn how to be helpful to one another. They learn how to find fun in life. And so I guess my message to parents is just start at the basics. And the basics are not the 3 R's, not reading, writing, and arithmetic. The basics are really what makes for a good life. And how do you provide the opportunities for your child to live a good life? And those opportunities means that your child has to be living a good life right now as a child, a happy life.
Thank you. Peter, why don't you go ahead and share your projects and websites, and then we'll go back to Bernie so he can do the same afterwards.
Okay, well, I guess the project that I'm most involved with right now is an organization called the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. You can easily find the website selfdirected.org. This is really, we talked a little bit earlier on this program about education and self-directed education. And this is a website that's really designed to educate the public about self-directed education, about how children learn through play and self-directed exploration. One of the reasons, they're actually right now probably about 180,000 by my best estimate kids in this country who are self-directing their education, who are not in what we would call school, not in a directed school, and also not doing school at home, not doing a curriculum-based school at home, not in a coercive educational environment, in charge of their own education. There are many, many thousands already who are adults and doing very well in this world. What I've just said about this idea of resume building, you have to do all the right things, you have to take all the right courses, you have to pass all the right tests, or somehow you're going to be homeless. This has absolutely been disproven by these people. Here are people who are not doing any of that stuff. They're not going to graded schools. They're not taking tests. And they're coming out okay. And those who want to go into a career that requires college, they're getting into college. This is the word that we want to get out there so that parents can have the courage to allow their kids to be kids and to recognize they're going to grow up better, more competent, more capable, more responsible if we let them run their own lives to a far, far greater extent than we currently are. So that's the project that I would be most interested in having people take a look at, the Alliance for Self-Directed Education.
Thank you. And also we did a show on the Alliance, and so I'll also link to that in the show notes page as well.
Great.
So thank you so much, Peter. It was such an honor to have you on the panel again, and I always enjoy hearing and learning from your wisdom. And
I just want to say it's an absolute honor to me to be on this with Bernie DeKoven. He's somebody I admire tremendously.
And I feel absolutely the same way. So thank you. And Bernie, why don't we end the show with you? Please do share what you've got, what you're working on now, and any other information that you'd like to share with our audience.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Peter, you made me cry. Now you stop that. Oh man, that was beautiful what you said, Peter. I really appreciate it. And not about me, but what you said about education and freeing the children, and so important. So, and uh, I mean, for me, it was a big honor. My honor speaking to you with you was bigger than your honor talking to me. Just want you to know that. So, okay, so I have a website, naturally. I have two, actually. One is called Deep Fun, DEEPFUN.com. Not shallow fun, but deep fun. And it has, it's kind of a virtual library of physical games, social games for children and adults, for really kind of, it covers the whole spectrum. Plus, it's a compendium of resources, articles, other people doing it. It's a kind of a launching point for anybody who wants to bring more play into their lives, their children's lives, and hopefully into schools and society in general. Then I have another website called A Playful Path, not The Playful Path, because that would be presumptuous. Just aplayfulpath.com, where you can find a free download. You can download for free. More than 600,000 downloads have already downloaded for free. Just amazing. At that aplayfulpath.com. Third, currently I'm exploring dying, and I have stage 4 cancer, and I'm trying to understand how I can best exit my life. And I've been discovering, I mean, it's been, I hate to say it, but as my body starts falling apart, my spirit starts falling together. And it's been such an amazing journey. Not that I would wish it on you guys. I'm just saying it's been such an amazing journey, because I've been receiving so much love from so many. I had no idea how many people, how many lives I've touched over the years, but it's just phenomenal, the kinds of letters I've been getting and email and opportunities to care. Oh, and I'm doing this thing. So I didn't really want to get buried in a cemetery and have a tombstone as my memorial. So I was trying to find something that I could make a memorial for some way. And I found this swing that's called the expression swing. And it's this beautiful thing where the parent and the child, young child, are sitting in like the swing like this, and they're face to face. They're both sitting and they're face to face. So the parent can not only swing the child that way, but also watch the child experience the big we of it all. And I couldn't get over what a beautiful idea this was, to be able to really allow that union to take place. So I talked to the company, which is called Game Time, and they're sending us for free. They're sending us a set of 2 swings. And Indy Parks has run, I live in Indianapolis, and they've run their foundation has run a drive to help finance the rest of it, which costs actually more than the swings did. But that's happening, and I'm very excited about that. We're going to have a play session tomorrow for the public. They can come and play with me. We're playing games. If I can do it, I'm going to try. And the final thing is, I have a book that I've already written that I'm hoping to get published. It's called The Infinite Playground, and it's about imagination, which I believe is one of the things that's being left out consistently when we're talking about playing games and fun. And I know Peter has addressed that, and it's one of the most, I mean, it's such an important capability. And you know how they keep on saying failure of imagination? You know, I believe much of our political situation has been caused by a profound and widespread failure of imagination. You know, people cannot imagine really the consequences of their decisions, and to such a point that even though they see them manifest manifest every day in the news, they still can't imagine that it has anything to do with the choices they've already made. So anyhow, it's about imagination and how to nurture it, and it has a whole bunch of games. I'm hoping it'll get published by MIT Press, who published the Well Played Game after they republished it after 35 years. What an honor that was, man. Anyhow, that's my story.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bernie. And I'm glad you brought up the swing set. There's a beautiful article on your site talking about, about the project. And I'm so excited. What a legacy you're leaving in this world.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, lady.
And Peter, did you have any final thoughts? I know you just opened your mic. I want to give you the honor of
I mean, I could go on forever with final thoughts. I just want to thank you, Eleni, for bringing Bernie and me together on this, and he's one of my heroes. So.
For many people. I can't even tell you how much honor this has been for me. So in closing, again, I just want to thank you both, and I want to thank Nina for putting together the two of you. She did the arranging behind the scenes. Nina's an incredible producer that's been helping out on these shows. So thank you, Nina. Thank you, Bernie. And thank you, Peter. And thank you to the folks over at Conscious Consumer Network as well for giving us the space to air these shows. And that's it. Wherever you are and whatever you do, continue to always do it for the love of learning.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.